Welcome once again to Tritiyo Matra. The United Nations involvement with Bangladesh began during the early stages of Bangladesh Liberation War in 1971. As millions fled to neighboring India, the then UN Secretary General Kurt Waldheim launched the first UN response in Bangladesh in April. In collaboration with the Indian government and with the backing of UNICEF, WFP, FAO, WHO, and the League of Red Cross Societies, the UNHCR, took the lead in coordinating humanitarian assistance to 10 million Bengali refugees. Following independence, the refugees returned to Bangladesh, and UN organizations participated in the restoration process. Currently, the UN system in Bangladesh is working to support national development priorities through a new generation framework called the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, UNSDCF, which is aligned with the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Bangladesh. UN agencies have been collaborating in a new and coordinated manner to assist the government in implementing the SDGs and increasing development impact in priority areas. To discuss the matter of the UN in Bangladesh, we have with us Ms. Gwyn, the UN resident coordinator in Bangladesh. Ms. Gwyn, welcome to the show.
I'm very happy to be here, Sina.
Since the independence of Bangladesh, the UN has been one of Bangladesh's main development partners. From your perspective, what is the role of the UN in Bangladesh now?
So you're absolutely right. I think the UN has been very much with Bangladesh since 1971 and the Liberation War. But I think the UN's involvement with Bangladesh and our partnership has changed as much as Bangladesh has changed in that journey until today. In 1971, I think WHO and WFP, so the Health Organization and the Food Organization, were first on the ground to provide assistance to people in Bangladesh, and that was just very basic humanitarian assistance. And over the years, as Bangladesh has developed and the country has now reached a stage where they're graduating from least developed country status, the relationship has evolved and the type of support has also evolved. So today, I think you've mentioned the cooperation framework. We're really working on different areas that are more linked to sustainable development. That's things like the economic development, supporting Bangladesh and thinking through job creation, thinking through graduation from least developed country status. We're working on creating a more resilient and healthy environment, looking at climate change adaptation, locally adaptation, how we can support Bangladesh's voices in global forum when we're advocating for loss and damages. We are also working on issues such as strengthening social services and social systems, thinking through what we can do to enhance with the Ministry of Education, for example, the quality of education that's been provided. Bangladesh has made huge strides in education, but there's always further innovation, further ideas, further qualities that can be enhanced. Another area of work is around gender-based violence and looking at enhancing gender equality progress that's already been made. We also work with institutions such as the National Human Rights Commission or some of the state infrastructure to look at how we can enhance institutions. So it's much more a technical and a support role that's really led by the government and led by the policies such as the 8th five-year plan or the various policy changes that the government and the people of Bangladesh would like to see. So it's really an evolving relationship, and one of the things that happened after 1971 was the Cyclone Bola and the loss of life. And again, we're still supporting in terms of humanitarian response when there's a climate disaster, but it's a totally different types of support. It's much more technical, it's much more around guidelines, it's no more about saving lives. The government does that.
Ms. Gwyn, what are the primary areas where the UN and Bangladesh are currently cooperating, and what are the main challenges for this cooperation given the numerous crises taking place worldwide, like pandemic, like Ukraine-Russia war,
So, I mean, we cooperate in many, many areas, and I think Bangladesh has made huge progress on poverty eradication and reduction, on various different aspects of the work. But I think we also have a very strong and important global partnership. Bangladesh is a huge contributor to peacekeeping, for example. That's one of the pillars of the UN Charter, is peace and security. So Bangladesh provides at the moment 6,000 troops, including 400 women soldiers, to peacekeeping. Bangladesh is also on this in the Human Rights Council, which is a very, very important role in terms of promoting and protecting human rights and human rights across the globe. So that's another key area where we see Bangladesh's leadership. Bangladesh is also chair of many of the UN agencies, which is UNDP, UNOPS, the Projects Agency. So there's a lot of interaction on climate issues, on the Climate Vulnerable Forum, or on advocacy globally. So there's a real important role that Bangladesh plays multilaterally. But there are many challenges, you've said yourself. And this week in New York, there's the General Assembly, and then we're talking about the SDG Summit. And the Secretary General has called for a huge level of investment, $500 billion US dollars from the developed countries to really support us moving forward on the SDGs, because there isn't enough investment. We're not making enough progress. We're also facing huge challenges, as everyone knows in Bangladesh much better than I, on climate. We're not going to hit the 1.5 degrees Celsius target by the end of the century unless we make further progress, and that has huge implications. And so we really need to hear the voices of countries like Bangladesh in advocating to address those challenges. And then, as I've mentioned, we have a lot of support, joint work together in Bangladesh on the National Adaptation Plan, on generating labour standards, looking at the agricultural sector reform, for example. IFAD and FAO are doing incredible work with the Ministry of Agriculture. So there's a very strong, long partnership, multi-sectoral. And obviously there's also the humanitarian aspect. And Bangladesh has welcomed 1 million Rohingya refugees to the country, and so we do a lot of work as well in humanitarian assistance with regard to the refugees.
As you were mentioning about the SDG summit, and you know that the Bangladesh Prime Minister is currently visiting New York to attend the UN SDG summit. What are your expectations of the summit, and how can Bangladesh accelerate its progress towards the sustainable development goals, in your opinion?
Well, that's really why I wanted to come on the show today, is to talk about the summit, because I think it's incredibly important. We've made only about 12% progress across the world on SDGs at the moment. We should be at 50%. We are halfway through reaching 2030, and we are not making the progress that we need to make across the world. So I'm really, really pleased that the Prime Minister and the team have gone to New York, because it demonstrates a commitment to the SDGs. And it also is pushing other countries to come together and really think through how we can accelerate progress. We need to do better on social protection and jobs. We need to do better on looking at digital infrastructure. We need to do better on education across the world, on health. So bringing the world leaders and asking them to recommit is really, really important. The Prime Minister is not just in New York attending the summit, she's also brought a statement of national commitment with her, which is a statement that has been worked on across the ministries, across the government, to articulate what the government would like to see going forward for the next 15 years, and highlighted some of these really critical areas. So the summit is very important because it's really about rescuing the people and the planet. And there is also a Climate Ambition Summit, which is part of the meetings in New York, which will hopefully also energize and help us move forward in the run-up to COP.
During the opening of the Bangladesh Private Sector Working Committee, you stated, I quote, when it comes to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Bangladesh's private sector has so much to gain and so much to give, unquote. Could you please elaborate on how private sector action on SDGs play a role in releasing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development?
Well, I mean, private sector in Bangladesh has been a key driver of development in the country, and the private sector has contributed to economic development already hugely, whether that's a ready-made garment sector, whether that's pharmaceuticals, whether that's the agriculture sector, which people don't talk about so much, but has been a huge driver of growth. Obviously, the journey continues. We're still on the same journey. We need to enhance. We need to move towards middle income status in terms of economic development. So how the private sector invests in the future, how the private sector innovates and develops will be very important in terms of ensuring that the development path continues and that growth continues. So one area is around diversification, for example, and bringing in different types of enterprise to Bangladesh. But another one is guaranteeing decent work, catalyzing green jobs, involving more women. The ready-made garment sector again has created employment for women, which has really brought 50% of the workforce into the economy, which is going to be a huge factor for growth going forward. And so that is a very key aspect of continued development in country. But then there's also the investment. So the Sustainable Development Goals will continue to require significant investment. And if we want to make the progress that we need to make before 2030, the investment of private sector is indispensable. It needs to happen. And so how we channel those resources to the programs that are most needed is a very important conversation. And that's also where we see more coordinated and strengthened engagement with private sector, whether it's chambers of commerce or the Bangladeshi Employers Federation or the various different private sector partners. It will be really critical to further advance the goals.
Gwyn, what do you foresee as the biggest risk for Bangladesh's development trajectory?
Bangladesh has done incredibly. I don't think anybody can deny it, and we hear it a lot. I think there have been challenges, and there will continue to be, whether it's the war in Ukraine, the impact on food prices, COVID, and the climate issue we've already touched on. But I think there's economic challenges. One of them is really about how we continue development and growth in the economy, given the need for diversification and bringing in different types of jobs into the country. Over-reliance on one industry is always problematic. And we need to do better to train young people who are going overseas to work maybe so they can be better qualified and they can get better jobs when they do travel. I think there's risks on the social side if we're not able to increase investment in education, in social services, in health and social protection. Young people need to have the skills that they need. We need to really think through where that investment is needed for the future and to take advantage of the young people and the workforce that's in place. We talk a lot about the demographic dividend, and I think we have another 10, 15 years in Bangladesh to really take advantage of that. So really having that focus investment will be really key, including on governance and institution building for the future. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and we need to do better at ensuring locally led adaptation, that we also look at mitigation seriously in Bangladesh, and so there's a lot to do on climate as well.
Regarding SDG, there are also a lot of discussions about Bangladesh's graduation from the category of the least developed country in 2026 and its significance for the country's future. So what are your assessments of the outcomes of the upcoming LDC graduation?
So LDC brings a lot of opportunities, the graduation from least developed country status, but it also brings challenges with it. The opportunities are increased trust from investors internationally, so a lot more foreign direct investment. It means that Bangladesh will have less costly loans potentially for development. But there are risks, because what it will mean is that Bangladesh will be treated as a middle income country. So the duty-free, quota-free tariffs that the country has benefited from will no longer be in place. So that is also something that needs to be looked at and a strategy adapted. Climate financing won't be as readily available. Intellectual property rights waivers will not be as readily available. So there's a lot to do in terms of developing a strategy to think about addressing those issues. A lot of thought has already happened, but we need to continue looking at competitiveness, diversification, technology, innovation, so that the transition when it happens is smooth and that the economy will continue to grow. So we need to see 2026 as a launching pad for 2029 and the future of Bangladesh. So it's an important time, but I think it's also a time of huge opportunity and possibility for the country.
Earlier you were talking about the climate, and as you are well aware, Bangladesh is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. Every year we see increased climate related challenges, including floods, monsoons and cyclones that frequently hit Bangladesh. How do you assess Bangladesh's readiness to address the climate challenge, and how does the UN support Bangladesh in its climate work?
So I had the opportunity to visit Sylhet last year following the floods, and I have to say it's really difficult to describe the impact of climate in Bangladesh until you actually see it yourself. It was extraordinary. And the scale of the floods that we've seen in the Chittagong district only a few weeks ago is also extraordinary. But what is also striking is how resilient Bangladeshis are, that the systems, the early warning systems in the country now work. The loss of life is relatively low compared to the scale of the disasters that the country is dealing with year on year on year. And so it's frightening because it's coming faster, and the scale and the unpredictability is increasing. So it's incredibly challenging. But Bangladesh has called for support and has called for global action. We need to do more to support Bangladesh in terms of financing, in terms of addressing the loss and damage agenda, which I think is something that the country, and I know a lot of very strong advocates are recognized across the world for the advocacy around loss and damage. But we are also supporting on locally led adaptation. Many of the agencies, UNDP, FAO, UNFPA, UN Women, are all working on the climate agenda. And that means programs that local people have put in place themselves, and we're supporting to enhance, because people in Bangladesh know what people in Bangladesh need more than we do. And so we're trying to support those programs, make them stronger, support the National Adaptation Plan and the priorities in there, support the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan, which is about addressing climate but taking into account economic development at the same time. So it's also an incredibly important vision for the country that we're trying to get behind. But then there's also the human side when the disaster hits.
Yeah.
So providing that humanitarian support is something that we continue to do in support of the government. We also have a new program. It's a program that is, Bangladesh is 1 out of 8 countries in the world. It's called Anticipatory Action, where we're able to provide support to people when we know the cyclone is coming or before the floods, so that they can buy what they need to buy, travel, move their animals, make sure that they have what they need in order to be safe, and so their livelihoods are not too badly impacted. And then finally, Bangladesh is a priority country for early warning for all, which is a commitment from the Secretary General and the UN that every person in the country will have access to early warning, regardless of the climate crisis, whether it's a cyclone, a flood, mudslide, whatever it happens to be. So that's something that we're working on with the Bangladeshi Red Crescent Society and the Ministry of Disaster Management. So there's a lot of work around climate. We have to do better, we need to scale up, and we need to be there for the government and the people in facing these challenges.
Let's move to a very crucial issue for Bangladesh and maybe for the region as well, regarding the Rohingya refugee crisis ongoing in Bangladesh. And we see that refugees are immensely affected by climate, as they live in temporary houses made of bamboo and can't protect themselves from the heavy rains. And we also see reports of frequent fires in the camps and continuous funding cuts. What is the solution to this extremely complicated crisis?
It is extremely complicated, and again, Bangladesh was really demonstrated very strong leadership in opening up the borders and allowing the Rohingya refugees to come into the country. But it's 6 years in, and there's no immediate solution in sight. It's very challenging, continues to be very challenging in Myanmar, and so we are facing a lot of different issues. You mentioned cyclones and weather-related disasters, and we saw Cyclone Mocha and the devastation this year. We've had many fires in the camps. And we also are facing financial cuts. We're providing humanitarian assistance, and this year we've had to cut the food rations to the Rohingyas twice already. And so people now are getting $8 a month for food, which is really only allowing them to buy rice and oil and very, very basic food supplies. So it's a very big concern. I know there's a lot of discussion about repatriation, return to Myanmar, and I know there's some pilots being discussed between the government of Bangladesh and Myanmar at the moment. The UN's position on that is very clear. Return needs to be dignified, safe and voluntary. If people want to return, we need to take that into account, and we need to support that, but it has to be based on information and informed choice. And I know that's something that the government has advocated for. But unfortunately, we believe that that will be a relatively small number in the immediate, and we need to maintain support, food assistance, healthcare, education for the people who are remaining in Bangladesh. So it's really a priority area of work for us. We're continuing to advocate with the international community on financing for the Rohingya, because security is a concern if things are left over the longer term in terms of inside the camps, and not enough money, not enough food, and the longer implications for the country is problematic. So we really need to make sure that people are taken care of, that care is dignified, that they're protected, and that we're able to support them for until they can go back home.
You have already explained the UN's position regarding the Rohingya repatriation, but the delegation from Myanmar visited Bangladesh twice recently, and reportedly some Rohingya refugees are prepared to move to Myanmar this year. Do you see any hope or this sort of arrangement can make any fruitful solutions?
So I don't know very much. I know as much as anybody else in terms of the situation on the ground in Myanmar. So I think what is very important for the UN is, again, that people need to be safe when they return home, and that return needs to be dignified. So if people volunteer and they want to go back and they have all of the information, we'll of course support that, and I think that's what the government is trying to do. I think there are conversations that need to be held in Myanmar, because when people go back, they need to also be supported. The financial situation in Myanmar and the economy is not in a good place. There's a lack of humanitarian funding as well. So it's important that we're able to make sure that people are taken care of when they go back, but also that there's some good conversations around citizenship, around safety, and key considerations that the Rohingyas themselves have. What is clear is when I go to visit the camps and I talk to people would like to go back to Myanmar. They're incredibly grateful to Bangladesh, but we just need to make sure that it's done in a way that is good for the individuals themselves.
There are a lot of different perceptions regarding the UN's role in human rights issues in Bangladesh. And what's your role as the UN resident coordinator and the role of the UN on human rights in Bangladesh, Ms. Gomez?
Thank you. So, I mean, maybe just to start by saying the UN's work emanates from the UN Charter, which has basically three pillars, three components. One is peace and security, which is linked to peacekeeping and all of that work. Another is human rights, and the third component is development. So we do have a role in human rights in the United Nations, and it's very much embedded in our cooperation framework. If we're working on education, every child has a right to education, needs to have access to education. So leaving no one behind is very much part of the SDGs, that it needs to be inclusive. And so rights and right to work, education, health, freedom of expression, all of those rights are very much part and parcel of our work on the ground. Bangladesh is member of the UN Human Rights Council. Bangladesh is signatory to 8 out of 9 of the Human Rights Conventions. And that means that Bangladesh promotes and protects human rights. So we're here also to support the government and the people of Bangladesh promote and protect human rights.
Recently, UN Special Rapporteur said that the draft Cyber Security Act set to replace the Digital Security Act, DS, should be revised. And you know the law has been already passed in the Parliament. How is the UN working with the government in this regard? And do you think this partnership has the potential to be fruitful?
So before the current Cybersecurity Act, before it was amended, it was the Digital Security Act, and always the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees provided quite a lot of technical inputs on the law to assist the government of Bangladesh to make sure that the law was compliant with international standards. And so those comments and that feedback, there was quite a lot of exchange. The new draft law has been passed now, and the same technical colleagues, the lawyers, have provided comments and feedback, and the Special Rapporteur, Irene Khan, has also provided her inputs on the CSA. So I think having a very constructive and open dialogue is important. I know that colleagues will continue to lobby on some of the issues that they see with the law, and I'm sure that we will continue to have that discussion with the Law Ministry, and hopefully we can reach some agreement in terms of some of the changes needed.
Ms. Gwyn, you know, this is the election year for Bangladesh, and it's a very critical and crucial time for Bangladesh, and the Election Commission has stated that Bangladesh will hold its next elections in January 2024. Do you have any opinions on the upcoming elections? What are your views of the UN's role regarding the elections?
So the UN only has a role in elections in a country when it's specifically requested, and there's only a couple of ways it can be requested. One is if there's a General Assembly resolution, or the Security Council requests the UN to participate, or if there's a formal request from the government. And so the government of Bangladesh has not made any formal requests for support for within the elections. We could potentially provide, for example, technical support or materials for polling stations, but that request hasn't been given to the UN. And so we don't have a role in Bangladesh in the elections. So that's very much the state of play. And we don't have any say either on the outcome of the elections. That's really for the people of Bangladesh to decide.
The UN has expressed concerns over the political violence that has injured and killed the people over the last few months in Bangladesh. Last year, you highlighted this issue while talking at the National Press Club. Do you still see the potential for violence as a big issue in the coming days or month?
It's very difficult for me to predict how the situation in Bangladesh will evolve, and if. But
you were observing, monitoring the situation.
Yeah, we monitor the situation. What we call for is peaceful elections. I think every country deserves peaceful election. Every citizen deserves not to have to face violence, and so that's something that we will continue to iterate. And that was a remark I made last year. I think there would have been violence at the time, and so that's a concern we continue to have, and call for peaceful, inclusive elections in Bangladesh.
Recently, the UN spokesperson said the elections in Bangladesh should be free and fair. Could you please comment on it and elaborate it, if you can? So that, if you want, actually.
So the Secretary General spokesperson and really speaks on behalf of the Secretary General. There's not much for me to add. So the Secretary General has asked for free and fair elections, and we call for peaceful elections, and that's something that I think the UN iterates for all countries facing upcoming elections, particularly when there's so much debate in country.
Thank you, Ms. Gwyn, for the most insightful conversation. I must say that in the coming days, the role of the UN will be one of the most critical factors in maintaining peace and stability in Bangladesh. That's all the time we have today, dear viewers, and thank you for watching the show. Stay with us for more important discussions like this in the coming days. Stay safe.